Voters made their voices heard across the country, but in New York's primary elections last night, with New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani's slate of progressive candidates sweeping establishment-backed Democrats and ousting two incumbent congressmen. In the city's 10th district, former city comptroller and mayoral candidate Brad Lander defeated incumbent Congressman Dan Goldman in a race where Israel's war in Gaza was a top issue. Then in the 13th district, Daria-Lisa Avila Chevalier defeated incumbent Congressman Adriano Espaillat. He's the powerful head of the Hispanic caucus back in Washington. Outside of Mamdani-endorsed candidates, in the 12th district, state assemblyman and former aide to New York Governor Kathy Hochul, Michael Lasher, came out on top of an 8-way race that saw artificial intelligence industry giants spend tens of millions of dollars trying to influence the outcome. Then in the 17th district, my home district, national security expert and combat veteran Kate Conley won the Democratic nomination for a key swing seat that could help determine control of the House in November. Her victory sets up a showdown with Hudson Valley Republican Congressman Mike Lawler, who's tried to balance moderate policy positions while also defending President Trump. I want to bring in MS Now reporter Will McDuffie. He was up late at one of the election parties, so thank you for being here. I hope you've had your Celsius or whatever your caffeine of choice is. Let's just start with the Mamdani of it all, because yesterday, as I was talking to sources, it was clear that they saw what Mamdani was doing as taking a risk. No one was asking the New York City mayor to start remaking who was on these congressional ballots and who was going to win in them. And yet, he had what seems like a good night.
He had a great night. I had a Democratic source text me even before they called New York 13, saying that Mamdani couldn't have dreamed of a better night. And it was a risk. He didn't have to endorse any of these candidates. I mean, none of these District Alley were going to fall to Republicans. I mean, Democrats had them in the bag. But he endorsed these three candidates who have stood by him for a long time, even when he was, little known in his race for mayor. And two of them were Democratic socialists like him. And he was able to help get them over the line, because I talked to voters, especially in the 13th district, which is Harlem and the Bronx, and voters who supported the socialist candidate there, Daria-Lisa Avila Chevalier, a lot of them said they did it because of Mamdani's support. And I want to play a bite for you from yesterday morning when Mamdani appeared with her outside a polling site, where he talked about why he supported these three congressional candidates. Let's take a listen.
I've spoken again, time and again, about the fact that we need to have a Democratic Party that isn't just willing to stand up, but also to stand for something. And too often we have to look at the history books to find that. We need to have a Democratic Party where working people can look at it and they can see themselves. And in Daria-Lisa, in Claire, in Brad, what we see are candidates who understand that it's not just enough to fight back against the cruelty of the federal government's positions and its policies. We also have to have a vision that goes beyond 2028 and that looks at the struggles of working people and says, I don't just see you. Here's my answer for how to actually make your life easier.
Okay, so if you are Hakeem Jeffries, fellow New Yorker, who is listening to that and saying, this is not just a moment right now, I am going to keep making moves like this, and it's a sign of a larger progressive thread in the party, what is the reaction you have as you see two of your incumbents knocked off?
I'd love to know what he's thinking today. And he dodged a bullet himself, because he was almost challenged by Democratic socialists. And Mamdani actually helped quash that because I think he was worried about ruffling feathers with someone who could potentially be the next Speaker of the House. Jeffries is definitely going to have to, perform a balancing act here, because you've got these candidates who now in his home city for future Congress people who are not aligned with him.
Yeah, and I also think there is an interesting thing here of, you're right to point out that these are blue seats. They are going to likely stay blue in November, which means that for Jeffries, if he's just trying to count to how do I get to the majority and thusly the Speaker gavel, this result set doesn't change that calculus for him.
Right.
But I think it changes the calculus of what does that Democratic caucus look like, and what are the priorities that a Speaker Jeffries is going to have to strategize around within the conference. I think the other piece of it, too, if we broaden outside the city to the place where I grew up, New York 17th, it's a district that I continuously go back to because it's been a bellwether for a long time. But this is one of the places that Democrats are really salivating over, because Mike Lawler is in a seat that Kamala Harris won narrowly in 2024. The challenger who won there, Kate Conley, someone who worked in the Biden NSC, is a combat veteran herself. It's not seemingly the candidate that Lawler wanted to run against. And so for Democrats, does this seem like the best case scenario there?
Well, I mean, Lawler might not have gotten his preferred candidate, but and he already foreshadowed this last night with the tweet, he's going to try to make this about those New York City candidates who won last night, the socialists, and he's going to try to tie whoever, Kate Conley, to those candidates. He's already foreshadowed that.
Yeah, he's foreshadowing that. And I think the other thing, too, is the thing about Lawler is he's an operative turned candidate. He used to run statewide races, including a gubernatorial here in New York. And so he is someone who understands the coalition building in the state. At the same time, Conley won that primary with about 50% of the vote, just shy of it, 49.5 when I last checked. So interesting to see the way that she was able to coalesce in a field that did have multiple candidates in it. It's going to be a race that we're going to keep talking about, and not just because I'm obsessed with getting to go home to my favorite diner in Briarcliff. I want to also take a look at some other primary results, though, because in South Carolina, President Trump is celebrating State Attorney General Alan Wilson winning the Republican nomination for governor. Trump endorsed him just a few days ago, though, after initially backing the other Republican candidate who lost there last night. It was like a weird dual endorsement situation. And then the state's first congressional district, a former Navy admiral fired by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, won the Democratic nomination in the race to fill Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace's seat. She's vacating it in large part because she ran for governor. She lost. And then in Maryland, Governor Wes Moore easily won the Democratic nomination in his bid for re-election. His November matchup will look familiar as he takes on Republican Dan Cox, whom he defeated in the 2022 general election. And in Utah's newly redrawn first congressional district, former Congressman Ben McAdams won the Democratic primary last night. This race is shaping up to be a promising pickup opportunity for Democrats in November. For McAdams, he is someone who would be making a return to Congress if elected in November. That was an interesting one because, as I was reporting on open and closed primaries yesterday, Utah allowed an open primary, McAdams more moderate. Interested to see the number of Republicans or conservatives that picked up ballots and tried to vote for him there. But you spent time in South Carolina, so if we focus there, that was a really weird governor's race. I mean, there's no other way to say it. And I wonder what you see in the power of a Trump endorsement or not in a state that I've been there since 2015 with Trump, the first time he ran for president. It is a state that is MAGA through and through.
It didn't seem to matter that much. He endorsed Pamela Evette, who was the lieutenant governor, served under Henry McMaster. And Trump endorsed her with about a week or so to go before the primary on June 9th. And I was out there on June 9th at a polling site in one of the most conservative parts of the state. Everybody I spoke to was pro-Trump, but many of them didn't care that he had endorsed Evette. They wanted to vote for the candidate that they liked. They didn't see why he would endorse her. And I think he saw data, too, that showed that she wasn't popular with South Carolinians, because then he did that dual endorsement, I think, to save face, because he saw what was going to happen. He saw those numbers. She lost by a lot.
Yeah, there's really no other way to spin it, right? And so if you take that, and again, every voter conversation is an anecdote that you wait to see if it fits some kind of larger narrative. But I do wonder if you look at a place like Iowa, where Randy Feenstra gets the Trump endorsement and he loses to someone else who's trying to bring the MAGA mantle. If you look now in South Carolina at this weird kind of face-saving dual endorsement, there have been a few other instances of this, too. I mean, what does it say about the power of being a Trump-backed candidate versus just a MAGA candidate? And there's plenty of counterexamples of when the president's endorsed and that person's won. But, you know.
Yeah, I think it seems to depend on the race and depend on the state and the candidate as well. People in South Carolina told me that Evette was never a strong candidate. And so I think that still factors in here. As strong as Trump's endorsement often is in Republican primaries, the candidate still matters.
Yeah, the candidate still matters. And I do think that's, you know, in the example of Feenstra, in the example potentially of Evette, it's an interesting way to build the question of what is the Trump brand right now. And then, of course, as you get to the general election, when the MAGA brand is a little bit more diluted and the general election electorate is different than the primary electorate, what does that look like? And there's tons of polling that shows it might be a steeper climb for Republicans, but we will see what we see. A lot of time between now and November. MS Now reporter Will McDuffie, you will be out there for us, but first get some sleep. Thank you for staying up.